When I first rolled into Savannah, Georgia, the air felt different. It wasn't just the humidity that clung to my skin like a damp shirt, or the scent of salt that drifted in from the river. It was quieter here, slower somehow, like time itself had traded its briefcase for a rocking chair. I told myself I needed that. After all, I was running. Not from the law, not from debt collectors, but from the mess I'd made of my own heart in Chicago. Chicago had been noise, arguments in apartments with walls too thin to muffle the anger, clinking glasses in bars where I lost too many nights, and the steady unraveling of a relationship I once swore would last forever. When it ended ugly. Shouted accusations, slammed doors, and a silence that cut sharper than the words. I was 31 and felt like a teenager who had just discovered heartbreak for the first time. So I packed up, found a small loft above River Street, brick walls and wide windows that looked down on the cobblestones. During the day, I coded for a startup that didn't care where I worked, as long as the lines of text I produced kept humming along. At night, I tried to find myself again. Sometimes that meant sketching portraits that never quite looked like the people they were supposed to be. Other times, it was losing myself in books where fictional characters had lives messier than my own. Maeve, my younger sister, never let me wallow for too long. She'd call from back home, her voice full of that sharp wisdom younger siblings seemed to inherit. "Ethan, you overthink everything," she'd tell me. "Life isn't a bug to debug." Easy for her to say. She had a husband, a mortgage, 2 kids who thought the world of her. I had a 1-bedroom loft, a coffee maker that spat more grounds than coffee, and the echo of my parents' voices fighting burned into my memory. Their divorce had been the soundtrack of my adolescence. Doors slamming, voices raised, dinners eaten in silence at opposite ends of the table. I learned to tiptoe through those years, careful never to say the wrong thing, careful to keep the peace. It left me terrified of confrontation and obsessed with balance, always trying to smooth things out before they broke apart. Maybe that's why I stayed too long in Chicago, clinging to a relationship that had turned sour long before it ended. Savannah was supposed to be a reset, and for the first few weeks, it was. I walked the riverfront, listened to jazz in smoky bars where the trumpet could make your heart ache, and convinced myself that solitude was just another word for freedom. But solitude can only take you so far. The truth is, I was lonely. That's when I met her. It was early September, the kind of late summer day where the heat sticks to your neck even under shade. I ducked into a coffee shop on an ivy-covered lane, thinking only of caffeine. And that's where I first saw Lila. She was standing at the counter, sketchbook under her arm, long auburn hair falling across her face as she argued with the barista about oat milk. I don't know what made me notice her. Maybe the confidence in her voice. Maybe the way her laugh seemed to ripple through the room. When she turned, her eyes caught mine. Bright, alive, like she had secrets to share. I froze, coffee order forgotten. She smiled. That was all it took. I didn't know it then, but the smile that drew me in would one day haunt me. We started simple. Lila was the kind of woman who made ordinary moments feel cinematic. Our first date wasn't even supposed to be a date. I ran into her again 2 days later, sketching by the river. She was perched on a bench, charcoal in hand, smudges on her fingertips. I said something awkward like, "Guess this is your spot." She looked up, grinned, and said, "Guess it's ours now." From there it snowballed. Sunset walks along the water where the sky bled pink and orange. Nights in jazz bars where she'd close her eyes and sway to the music, lost in the sound. She'd pull me into her world, full of half-finished paintings, late-night tacos, and spontaneous plans that left me dizzy. I liked her energy. It was the opposite of mine. I was cautious, hesitant, always thinking 5 steps ahead. She was reckless in the best way, jumping into the moment without checking the depth of the water. For a while that felt refreshing. But then came the texts. At first, they were sweet. "Good morning. Did you sleep okay?" Or, "Thinking of you." Hope your day isn't too boring. But soon, the messages piled up. 10 before lunch, 20 by dinner. If I didn't respond within an hour, my phone buzzed again. Where are you? Why aren't you answering? You're ignoring me. One night over takeout, I tried to set boundaries. I set the cartons of lo mein on the table, looked at her and said, Lila, I need my space sometimes. It's not about you. It's just how I am. She put down her chopsticks, eyes narrowing. If you loved me, I wouldn't have to ask for it. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but sharp enough to cut through me. I froze. The words lingered long after she left that night. By late September, the red flags weren't just flags, they were fire alarms. She started showing up at my loft unannounced. Once I came home from the grocery store to find her sitting on my steps, arms crossed, sketchbook in her lap. I was worried, she said. You didn't answer my texts. I wanted to believe it was care, concern, but deep down I knew it was control. Maeve noticed something in my voice during one of our calls. You sound tired, Ethan, she said, like you're walking on eggshells again. I sighed. It's complicated. It's not, she shot back. You're letting this eat you alive. She's crossing lines. You know that. She was right. I just didn't want to admit it. By the first week of October, I knew I had to end it. My chest tightened every time my phone buzzed. I stopped sketching. I stopped sleeping. Even coding, something that used to calm me, felt impossible with her voice echoing in my head. I blocked her number one night, my hands trembling as I hit the button. It felt final, heavy. For the first time in weeks I breathed, but peace didn't last. 3 nights later, I woke to the sound of shattering glass. My loft window, broken. I stumbled into the living room, heart pounding. Nothing was stolen. Nothing moved. Just shards of glass on the floor, rain pouring in from the storm outside. I called the police. They shrugged. Could be a break-in attempt. Could be random vandalism. Hard to say. But I knew. I bought motion sensor cameras the next day, installed new locks, kept a baseball bat under my bed. Still, the unease lingered. A week later, the cameras picked something up. At 2:30 a.m., the screen showed movement, shadows shifting across the frame. But when I replayed it, no figure appeared. Just darkness moving where it shouldn't. Then came the text, from an unknown number. You can't hide. I know. My stomach dropped. She had found a way back in. October 18th is burned into me. It was 3:45 a.m. when the crash came. Louder than anything I'd ever heard. The back door splintering, wood giving way under force. I jolted awake, grabbed my phone, and dialed 911 with shaking hands. Someone's breaking into my apartment, I whispered. Please hurry. I crouched in the dark, clutching the baseball bat. Every creak of the floorboards sent a chill through me. My breath came in short bursts. The sirens arrived minutes later, though it felt like hours. When the officers burst in, they found her, Lila. She was restrained, pale, mascara streaked down her cheeks. In her hand was a copy of my loft key. I never gave it to her. I never wanted her to have it. Where she got it remains a mystery. They cuffed her, read her rights, and let her out. As she passed me, her eyes locked onto mine. No words, just a look that froze me in place. Court came weeks later. Turns out she had quit her art classes, isolated herself, spun lies to friends about why we weren't together. The judge ordered probation and therapy. I moved apartments, started working fully remote, and even rented a P.O. box so no one would know where I lived. But safety doesn't erase fear. A year later, the sound of a creak at night still makes me tense. Flickering streetlights outside my window still send my pulse racing. Maeve visited during the trial. She hugged me hard, like she wanted to shield me from everything. Ethan, she whispered, you did the right thing, but promise me, sleep with the lights on at least for a while. I laughed. but only to keep from crying. What haunted me most wasn't her breaking in, or the texts, or even the night she was arrested. It was the quiet way obsession slid into my life. At first it looked like love, like care, like attention. But love doesn't suffocate. Love doesn't stalk. Love doesn't break your door down at 3:45 a.m. I learned the hardest truth. Some people don't fall in love with you. They fall in love with the idea of owning you. And when you take that ownership away, they unravel. Even now, when I walk River Street at sunset, I think about that. About how close I came to mistaking possession for affection. Savannah gave me peace, but it also gave me shadows. Obsession often disguises itself as devotion, but love built on control is not love at all. True relationships are rooted in trust, respect, and freedom, not surveillance or fear. If someone crosses your boundaries, listen to your instincts. Protecting your peace is not selfish, it is survival. I've always measured my life in scents. Chocolate truffles melting on a warm counter, the sharp tang of citrus after rain, the faint smokiness of aged wood in my mother's old Victorian house. Growing up in New Orleans wasn't easy. My father left when I was 8, a ghost in my memories, and my mother's love came with strings. Discipline disguised as care, control disguised as protection. She had a perfume for every mood, every argument, every punishment, and I learned early that smells could mask truths or reveal them. By the time I was in my early 20s, I had buried myself in fragrances, becoming a perfumer, a craftsman of smell rather than human emotion. Living in a historic brownstone in the French Quarter, I surrounded myself with bottles, oils, and notes that smelled like possibility. The streets below were alive with music, food, and tourists who didn't notice me beyond my silhouette behind the thick, brass-trimmed doors of my studio. Loneliness was my companion, but I wore it like a well-tailored coat, comfortable, familiar, safe. My little niece, Camille, would tease me endlessly. "Uncle Julian, you smell like chocolate and sadness," she'd say, giggling. I laughed too, hiding the ache behind the corners of my mouth. I had convinced myself that intimacy was overrated, that connections were fleeting, and that people often disappointed in ways no perfume could mask. Then came Marin Vale. It was a drizzly Thursday in mid-October 2024 when I met her at a perfume workshop I was teaching. I noticed her immediately. Dark hair falling in loose waves, eyes that seemed to drink in every scent in the room, and a laugh that rang like wind chimes. She approached me while I was adjusting a vial of amber and vetiver. "You made this?" she asked, lifting the bottle carefully as though it were glass and truth itself. "Yes," I replied, smiling cautiously. "It's a work in progress. I'm calling it Autumn Haze." Her eyes sparkled. "It smells like possibility, and something familiar I can't quite place, like childhood rain." I blinked. Most people would have nodded politely, maybe sniffed and smiled. She had memorized the subtle layers of the fragrance in seconds. I felt my chest tighten in a way I hadn't expected. That night, we walked along the Mississippi, stopping at jazz cafes and sampling beignets dusted in powdered sugar. I found myself talking, truly talking to someone, and the conversation flowed like warm syrup over a hot biscuit. Yet beneath her charm, there were subtle shifts I couldn't ignore. She rearranged my bottles, commented on my method, and questioned my choices in a way that made my studio feel less like a sanctuary and more like a stage I couldn't control. "Julian," she said one evening, leaning over the oak counter, "you're holding back. I can see it in your hesitation. Why are you hiding things from me?" "I'm not hiding," I murmured, adjusting the cap on a vial. "I just like to work in stages. Some things aren't ready yet." Her lip quivered. "I don't understand. If you care about me, you'd trust me with everything. Every scent, every thought." That night, I lay awake in my bed, inhaling the faint traces of lavender and amber in my sheets, wondering if the intoxicating feeling of being seen could come at the cost of losing control of my life. The texts started innocuously enough. "What are you doing?" she'd ask, followed by a string of emojis. But soon they escalated, dozens a day, some accusatory, some pleading, all tethered to her obsession with my attention. "I saw you smile at the barista today," one read. "Why didn't you smile at me like that? Don't you love me?" I tried reasoning with her. "Marin, I need space sometimes. Even a little solitude doesn't mean I don't care." "Alone? You're pushing me away. I thought you cared," she texted, her words dripping with hysteria. I laughed nervously during the workshop one morning. "Camille," I said over the phone, "I think I'm losing my mind. She's intense." Camille's frown cut through the line. "Julian, she's not normal. You're suffocating yourself for someone who doesn't respect boundaries. Get help before it's too late." I tried to shrug it off, but her presence in my apartment one evening confirmed my fears. I had returned from a gallery showing to find the door unlocked. The faint street lamp glow revealed her crouched over a vial I was experimenting with, her fingers delicately tracing the bottle. "I couldn't stay away," she whispered. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, were terrifyingly calm. I took a step back. "Marin, you can't just come in. This is my home." Her grasp on my arm tightened. Panic surged. I called the police, who arrived within minutes, their presence both comforting and surreal. She was taken away, but the violation lingered like an indelible scent. My sanctuary felt defiled. Even after she was gone, her influence haunted the air. A faint trace of sandalwood in the studio would make my chest tighten, memories of her whispers swirling like smoke in the corners of my mind. Months passed, but my life didn't feel restored. I fortified my studio with locks, cameras, and an assistant I trusted implicitly. Rare bottles were moved to hidden storage, and I kept meticulous logs of who entered my loft. Every sound became a potential signal, every shadow a reminder. Still, the desire to connect lingered. I wanted companionship, a reminder that life wasn't solely composed of isolation and caution. But each time I considered meeting someone new, I imagined Marin's intense gaze, the suffocating obsession that had nearly destroyed me. I confided in Camille often. "I want to live without fear," I said one evening, sipping chamomile tea. "But I feel like the moment I trust someone, I'm signing over pieces of myself." "You survived, Julian," she reminded me, placing her hand over mine. "That's proof you can navigate the world without losing yourself. Don't let her define your life." Her words settled like soft petals, but the scars remained invisible, stitched into the way I measured proximity, timed my evenings, and held the doors to my heart. Slowly, I began reclaiming the joy in my craft. I experimented with layering unexpected notes, bergamot over cedar, dark chocolate over vetiver, jasmine with a hint of rain-soaked stone. Each fragrance became a meditation, a way to remind myself of autonomy. I opened my doors for small workshops again, letting students wander through my scents without fear. But I maintained boundaries firmly. No one uninvited, no one unsupervised. One evening, a client complimented me on a new fragrance. "It smells like freedom," she said. I realized she had no idea how literal her words were. Freedom, the one thing I had nearly lost, reclaimed through vigilance, courage, and the slow, careful rebuilding of my life. I reconnected with friends I had neglected, allowing laughter and conversation to re-enter spaces once occupied solely by glass bottles and my solitary heartbeat. Years later, I still remember the tightness in my chest the first night I realized Marin wasn't just possessive, she was dangerous. The faint trace of sandalwood in a loft corner, the uninvited note left on my doorstep, the endless texts. They all reminded me that love and obsession can smell alike at first. Camille visited one afternoon, hugging me tightly. "Uncle, you survived. That's what matters. Don't let anyone take your air again." I inhaled deeply. She was right. Perfume could enchant, seduce, and comfort, but it could also mask danger. The lesson was simple but hard-earned. Boundaries are sacred. Intuition is vital, and no love is worth sacrificing your safety. Love, I realized, wasn't about losing yourself in someone else. It was about finding someone who respects the space between the heartbeats, who lets you breathe while standing beside you. And for the first time in years, my life smelled of hope, not fear. True intimacy thrives on trust and mutual respect. Obsession, control, and violation of boundaries are not love. They are danger disguised. The strongest measure of self-worth is knowing your limits, protecting your sanctuary, and never allowing anyone to make you fear the very air you breathe. My mother, she existed somewhere on the periphery, her attention fleeting, her warmth a distant echo I only caught in rare, fragile moments. Music became my only refuge, the one place where rules couldn't cage me. When my fingers touched the piano keys, I could disappear from the world entirely. By the time I moved into my loft above the conservatory in Seattle, I was 32 and firmly invested in the rhythm of my own life. Long practice sessions, a few close friends, and nights spent composing rather than socializing. My roommate, Tessa, a childhood friend who had somehow survived my social awkwardness, liked to tease me. "Lucas," she'd say, tossing her coffee mug onto the counter, "you pour your soul into that piano, but you lock it away from everyone else. You can't live in your music forever." I'd laugh, partly because she was right, partly because admitting the truth sounded too dangerous. It was late August 2025 when I first met Sylvie Mercer. I'd been performing at a small recital, late-night crowd, intimate room, one flickering chandelier overhead. She sat near the front, eyes fixed on my hands as they glided over the keys. Afterward, she approached with a shy smile, a warmth in her voice that I hadn't heard in years. "You play like the world pauses," she said, leaning over my shoulder at the cafe afterward. The cafe was dim, quiet except for the soft clink of cups and the low hum of conversation. I've never felt music like that. Not just heard it. I felt my chest tighten. It had been years since someone had looked at me that way. I laughed, unsure how to respond. Sylvie wasn't just beautiful. She was magnetic in a way I couldn't explain. Our first date followed soon after. A rooftop dinner with fairy lights, the Seattle skyline spread out beneath us like a painting. We shared wine, laughed too loudly at each other's jokes, and when she touched my hand, it felt electric. I told myself this was harmless, a spark between two adults. But I didn't notice the first cracks, the subtle possessiveness hiding behind her intensity. She asked about who I talked to in lessons. She hovered behind me at the piano, examining my sheet music. I dismissed it at first, calling it curiosity, admiration. I didn't yet see the shadow of obsession forming. It wasn't long before Sylvie's obsession became harder to ignore. After a minor slip during a performance, I tried to explain, my voice careful. "Sylvie, I need space after a concert to unwind. It's nothing personal," I said, gesturing toward the piano. Her eyes blazed, and she grabbed my hands tightly. "Space? You're hiding something from me. You're trying to push me away." I recoiled, shocked by the intensity. And yet, despite the warning signs, I still felt drawn to her. The laughter, the shared glances, the way she seemed to see inside me. It felt intoxicating. Then came the constant messages. My phone would buzz nearly every hour. "Why didn't you reply? Were you with someone else?" My anxiety grew. I started keeping my laptop and music close, worried about what she might do. Tessa noticed the change immediately. "You look like hell, Lucas," she said one afternoon while I played a hesitant chord. "She's obsessive, and you're letting her in. You have to protect yourself." I wanted to believe her, but part of me clung to Sylvie's charm, rationalizing her behavior as love. That's what made her dangerous. The line between passion and possession blurred so completely that I couldn't see it until it was too late. It was mid-September when she sent me a message about a secret midnight rehearsal at an abandoned concert hall. My instincts screamed no, but my curiosity and desire overruled caution. The hall was dark and silent, shadows pooling in every corner. Sylvie stood at the grand piano, the moonlight outlining her silhouette. As I stepped closer, A figure emerged behind her. A masked man, moving toward me with deliberate steps. "You belong here with me. Forever," she whispered, her voice soft, almost affectionate as the man advanced. Panic shot through me. I barely managed to dodge him, bruised and disoriented as he grabbed my sheet music and laptop before disappearing into the shadows. I realized then what Tessa had tried to warn me about. Sylvie hadn't just been obsessive. She had manipulated someone else to enact violence against me. She framed it as love, but her intentions were anything but tender. After the incident, I relocated my loft, added cameras, and relied heavily on Tessa to navigate the aftermath. The police investigation confirmed my fears. Sylvie had orchestrated the attack, carefully planning every detail. Even after the danger passed, the trauma lingered. Simple acts, opening a door, walking alone, even touching a piano, felt fraught with tension. I became hypervigilant, obsessively checking locks and reviewing camera footage. I tried to process the paradox. Her tender words, her moonlit dinners, and her violent manipulations existed in the same person. It was hard to reconcile. Love had been used as a weapon, and I was left with nothing but anxiety and confusion. Months later, I found myself back at the piano alone in my new loft. Tessa leaned against the doorway. "Lucas, love shouldn't hurt like this," she said softly. I nodded, pressing a key gently. The note resonated through the empty room. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to feel relief. Music remained my sanctuary, my refuge. But I had learned a hard truth. The most intoxicating melodies can hide dangerous dissonances. I began rebuilding, setting boundaries, understanding the value of trust, and learning to distinguish love from obsession. Sylvie's shadow lingered, but it no longer controlled me. The piano became not just an escape, but a tool for reclaiming my life. Passion and intensity are not always indicators of love. True love respects boundaries, nurtures trust, and never seeks to manipulate, control, or harm. Obsession may masquerade as affection, but it leaves fear, pain, and trauma in its wake. Protect your heart, trust your instincts, and remember, not every beautiful melody is meant to be played. I've always believed the ocean raised me more than my family did. Some kids learned responsibility from chores or sports, but I learned it from tide charts. I learned patience while watching the pull of the moon. I learned resilience when the surf knocked me down and I had to swim back up. The ocean never lied to me. It never tried to control me. It never demanded more than I could give. Growing up in New Hampshire, I lived under the thumb of my older brother Thomas. He was loud, competitive, always ready to remind me that I was weaker, slower, and, according to him, smarter only in the nerdy ways that didn't matter. My mom made it worse, because she set the bar so high I could barely breathe. "You're going to make something of yourself, Adrian," she'd tell me every report card season, her eyes cutting sharper than any tide. Perfection isn't optional. What she never understood was that perfection broke me. I hid in aquariums, in field trips to the coast, in every tide pool I could find. There, I could breathe. There, I could be me. By the time I was a teenager, I knew I wanted to be a marine biologist. I wasn't interested in people, too messy, too unpredictable. I wanted coral reefs, sea turtles, dolphins, kelp forests. I wanted the water to tell me its secrets. When I finally got out, college, graduate school, then the job in Boston, I built my life around the harbor. I bought a small condo overlooking the water. At night, I'd fall asleep to the sound of gulls and waves tapping against the seawall. It wasn't loneliness. It was peace. June, my best friend since undergrad, never let me forget how isolated I'd become. "You're married to the ocean, Adrian," she teased me once as we walked along the boardwalk. "You study tides like they're gospel. But love? You act like it's a hurricane you're too scared to sail through." Maybe she was right. Love wasn't predictable like the ocean. It didn't follow rules, charts, or gravitational pulls. Love could drown you. So I stayed on shore, safe. That was until I met Serena Vale in July of 2025. I wasn't looking for her. She crashed into my life like a rogue wave. One minute I was fixing an enclosure at the Wildlife Rehab Center. The next minute she was there beside me, splashing water onto her shoes, laughing at her own clumsiness. She had this wild energy about her, a spark I couldn't look away from. She wasn't just alive, she was alive in bold letters. When she looked at me and said, "You make science feel like poetry," something in me cracked open. For the first time in years, I let myself believe love might be as safe as the tides. I was wrong. Our first official date was a kayak trip through the harbor on a warm July night. The water shimmered with bioluminescent plankton, glowing electric blue with every stroke of the paddle. It was the kind of night you'd see in a movie. Serena leaned close and whispered, "This feels like magic, doesn't it?" And it did. For once, I wasn't thinking about data sheets or tide tables. I was thinking about her. At first, our relationship was intoxicating. Serena loved everything I loved, except she loved it louder, bolder, faster. She dove into shark cages, paddled into storms, drew tidal sketches like she could capture the sea with a pencil. She wanted me there for all of it, and I wanted to be, at least in the beginning, but I started noticing cracks. She needed to know where I was all the time. If I didn't text back fast enough, her tone turned sharp. "What, you're too busy for me now?" she'd snap over the phone. When I tried to explain that I needed space, she'd frown like I'd just betrayed her. One evening after a long day at the lab, I told her I couldn't go out. "I need rest tonight. I can't join you for the tide survey," I said gently. Her eyes narrowed. "Rest? You're choosing your work over me? I thought you loved me." I tried to laugh it off. "It's not about that. I'm just tired." But later that night, I found a note tucked into my kayak paddle. "If you can't keep up, maybe you shouldn't love me." I should have walked away then. I knew the warning signs, obsession dressed up as passion. But part of me didn't want to lose her. After years of pushing everyone away, I finally felt seen. So I stayed. That decision nearly drowned me. By August, things had shifted. Serena wasn't just passionate, she was invasive. She started showing up at my lab unannounced. One time I walked in and found her moving my equipment around. "You're too careful," she told me with a mischievous smile. "I'll make you feel alive." At first I thought she was just quirky, reckless. But then came the questions. "Who's that you were talking to at the boardwalk? Why were you smiling at her?" My phone buzzed constantly, dozens of texts, accusations hidden between declarations of love. I confided in June one night over coffee. "She's everywhere. I can't breathe without her asking why." June leaned forward, worry in her eyes. "That's not love, Adrian. That's control." But I wasn't ready to hear it. I convinced myself it was just intensity, that maybe I wasn't used to someone loving me so fiercely. I excused her behavior, until the night I came home and found the sliding glass door to my balcony unlocked. Inside, the condo was dim, but I could see the flicker of candles around my coral tanks. My heart raced as I spotted the mess. Papers scattered, equipment moved, drawers open, and then the note on my desk. "I can't breathe if you aren't mine." My hands shook as I locked the door, checked every room. The air smelled of seawater, and her perfume. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I noticed small scratches along the hull of my kayak. Not wear and tear scratches, deliberate ones. It felt like a warning. I finally told June everything. She grabbed my hands and said firmly, "You're not imagining this. It's escalating. You need help before it gets worse." I called the police that afternoon. Filing a restraining order wasn't the relief I thought it would be. Yes, the police took my statement. Yes, they documented the note and the scratches. But paper doesn't stop someone who believes obsession is love. Serena kept finding ways to remind me she was near. Anonymous messages, glimpses of her car parked down the street. The paranoia burrowed into me. I installed cameras, changed my locks, even stopped kayaking at night. But still I'd wake up sweating, convinced I heard her at the door. One night, around 2 a.m, I jolted awake. The motion sensor light outside my balcony had clicked on. I grabbed the bat I kept near the bed and crept toward the window. Nothing. Just the tide rolling in. But my pulse wouldn't slow. By September, I barely recognized myself. I was jumpy, distracted, constantly on edge. June sat me down one evening, her voice gentle but firm. "Adrian, you're surviving, but you're not living. She's still controlling you, even from the outside." I wanted to believe her, but it felt like Serena's shadow stretched everywhere. Even the ocean, my sanctuary, felt tainted. The smell of salt air mixed with her perfume in my memory, and I couldn't separate the two. The restraining order held, technically. She didn't break into my condo again, but I still carried her with me, in every ripple of water, every flicker of candlelight, every shadow crossing my balcony. It took months to reclaim pieces of myself. Therapy helped, work helped, and most of all, June helped, reminding me that survival was victory enough. One evening, as summer turned to fall, June and I sat on the balcony watching the harbor glow. The water reflected the city lights, calm, steady. I breathed in deeply, finally letting myself feel something close to peace. "You saved yourself, Adrian," June said softly, her hand brushing mine. "That's the real adventure." I nodded, staring at the water. She was right. For so long, I thought adventure meant diving into someone else's storm, matching their waves no matter the cost. But real adventure was choosing to survive, choosing to live. The tides were safe again, but I knew now the currents of the heart could be far more dangerous. Love, when it crosses into obsession, isn't love at all. It's control disguised as passion. True love respects boundaries, nurtures trust, and allows space to breathe. The greatest act of courage is not holding on to someone who drowns you, but finding the strength to let go and save yourself. I've always had a love-hate relationship with Philadelphia. The streets are crowded, loud, full of life and opportunity, but also relentless, unforgiving, especially when your bank account is perpetually hovering near zero. I live above a tiny cafe in South Philly, my apartment crammed with a mattress, a second-hand desk, and a few instruments I treat like treasures. Most days I'm Elias Monroe, 27-year-old barista and part-time jazz musician, trying to keep my head above the financial tide while chasing a dream that seems to drift farther the harder I chase it. I grew up believing that hard work and talent would be enough to succeed, but life has this way of reminding you otherwise. I racked up student loans after dropping out of a finance degree, convinced I could survive on ambition alone. My roommate, Lena, never lets me forget it. "Eli, you live in music and ramen noodles," she'd snap, shaking her head at my cluttered apartment. "Maybe it's time to get serious about life, or at least lock your door." That November night, the city seemed to hum in anticipation, and I felt it too. I had wrapped up a late shift at the cafe and wandered to a local underground jazz showcase, my guitar case slung across my back. The room was warm, the smell of coffee and sweat mingling, and the stage lights casting shadows that danced on the walls. That's when I saw her. Vivienne Cross. She had a presence that made the room bend around her, her laughter light but sharp, cutting through the haze like crystal. Her eyes sparkled with a confidence I couldn't name, and for a moment, I felt like I didn't exist. Not as a man, but as a human being yearning to be noticed. Our first conversation was casual, about music and local haunts, but the chemistry was instant. We walked the cobblestone streets together after the show, sharing hot chocolate from a street vendor. Snowflakes dusted her hair and eyelashes, and she twirled me into a waltz outside a closed theater. I had never felt warmth like that, and for a moment, I believed life could actually match my dreams. But even in that moment, I didn't notice the subtle edges, her insistence on luxury, the little teasing barbs about my small apartment and modest pay. I laughed along, not knowing that laughter can sometimes be the first step into danger. Over the next few weeks, Vivian and I became inseparable. I watched her sip lattes at the cafe with her designer scarf draped over her shoulders, and I couldn't help but feel like I was living in a movie I couldn't afford to be part of. At first, it was charming. She teased me about my thriftiness, saying things like, "Eli, I'll teach you how to enjoy life beyond dollar signs." I thought it was playful, harmless, but charm has a way of morphing into pressure. One night, as we sat on my tiny sofa, sharing lukewarm coffee, I tried to explain, "Vivian, I can't take you to that gala. I barely have enough for rent and groceries." Her eyes hardened, lips tightening. "If you loved me, money wouldn't matter. I need more than just coffee and jazz, Elias. You're holding me back." Her words hit deeper than any financial stress could. I felt trapped in my own life, her expectations eclipsing my reality. Suddenly, what had been warmth and excitement became tension, and fear I didn't fully understand yet. It started with incessant texting, questions about who I was with, where I was going. Then came the unannounced visits to my apartment. She rearranged my jazz sheets, left expensive gifts I couldn't afford to return, and watched me as though every moment was a test I had already failed. One morning, a note slipped under my door read, "I can't live in second place. Either you match me, or I disappear." My hands shook as I held it. Lena noticed my agitation. "Eli, this isn't love. She's taking over everything, your space, your music, your money. You have to stop this before it's too late." I wanted to believe it was an exaggeration, that the thrill of romance made everything seem bigger than it was. But deep inside, a quiet, nagging fear told me Lena was right. By early December, Vivian's behavior had escalated. My guitar strings were mysteriously cut. My apartment door was found unlocked when I was certain I had locked it, and I noticed suspicious withdrawals from my bank account. Each incident was accompanied by her calm, almost sweet explanations. "I just wanted to help you live properly," she'd say, smiling like it was a kindness rather than a violation. I stopped sleeping properly. Jazz sessions lost their magic. Each note I played felt heavy, weighed down by the looming presence of Vivian's influence. I confided in Lena one evening, slumping over the tiny kitchen table. "I think she's dangerous. I feel like I'm losing control of my life." "Eli," she said, gripping my shoulders, "you're letting her invade everything. Call someone, please, before it's too late." The spiral continued until mid-December. A snowstorm raged outside when Vivian invited me to an abandoned loft for a romantic surprise. When I arrived, she confronted me, demanding total control over my money and life. Fear gripped me like ice, but I realized I couldn't comply. I pretended to comply while secretly dialing 911 on my phone. Her eyes lit with expectation, and I smiled through my panic. When the police arrived, they restrained her and issued immediate protective orders. The relief was overwhelming, but the aftermath left me shaken, questioning every choice I had made in trusting her. I spent weeks untangling her influence from my daily life, changing passwords, rechecking bank statements, and cautiously reopening my jazz notebook. Lena stayed by my side, patient, protective, a reminder that grounding and safety come from those who truly care. Months later, I returned to the stage. The small jazz clubs I frequented became my sanctuary again. Each performance was tentative at first, each note a declaration that my life and my music remained mine. Vivian was gone from my life, subjected to therapy and supervision, but the memory of her shadow lingered. I realized that the thrill of romance could mask danger. Her attention, intoxicating in the cold November nights, had hidden her obsession. Love, I learned, can be warmth on a snowy evening, but obsession turns every gesture into fear. Lena hugged me one evening as I set up my piano for a small gig. "Eli, You survived love, obsession, and ruin. That's a kind of victory. I nodded, pressing a soft key. The sound rang out into the cafe, clear, warm, and unmistakably mine. My music, and I, had survived. Romance can be intoxicating, but love should never demand control or fear. Boundaries and self-respect are vital. Obsession is not love. True survival comes from recognizing danger early, trusting intuition, and reclaiming your life before it is stolen. I grew up in a house that smelled like tobacco and unspoken words. My father, quiet and precise, ran our small hardware store with an iron discipline, muttering low warnings about bills, rent, and life in general. My mother left when I was 10, slipping out one rainy morning with nothing but a suitcase and a whispered, "I can't do this anymore." After that, the house became a shrine to silence, where my father's murmurs were the only soundtrack. I learned early to make myself small, to occupy the corners of rooms and hearts. Art became my sanctuary. I would sit for hours sketching abandoned buildings, peeling paint, broken windows, and rusted fire escapes. The quiet of Montclair at night, fog curling around the streetlights, gave my drawings a mood I couldn't find anywhere else. Jazz records played softly on my small turntable. Miles Davis, Chet Baker, ghosts of a life I wanted to imagine for myself. Dating had always terrified me. My first serious relationship in college ended with my girlfriend leaving because I wasn't enough, or maybe because I was too much of nothing. Either way, I retreated further into my sketches and my routines. And yet, when I stumbled upon Isla's profile on a niche art forum, curiosity pried open the door I had shut tight. Isla was 25, a ceramicist from Brooklyn, and her art had the same dark whimsy I adored. Tiny clay figurines, eerie street sketches, paintings of foggy alleys. Her words carried a kind of quiet rebellion. She wrote about wandering cemeteries at night, collecting antique keys, and finding beauty in the broken. I was drawn to her immediately. Our messages started cautiously. She teased me, challenged me, sent photos of empty streets lit by rain and the occasional flickering streetlight. One night, after a long back and forth about sketching techniques, she suggested we meet at a local art cafe. My stomach twisted in anxiety. Montclair's fog was heavy at night, swallowing the familiar, but curiosity won. When I arrived, sketchbook clutched nervously to my chest. Isla was already there, paint-stained fingers wrapped around a cup of tea, her leather satchel brimming with tiny sculptures. "You actually came," she said, her voice teasing but soft. I managed a laugh. "I wouldn't miss your eerie charm." We ordered coffee, talked about our childhoods, and for the first time in years, I felt like someone truly understood my obsession with quiet beauty. I shared stories of my father, the nights I stayed awake sketching to escape him, and the loneliness that had become my constant companion. Isla listened, leaning forward slightly, eyes dark and intense, nodding in ways that made my chest tighten. And then there was the first shadow. She asked subtle questions about my apartment, who else I met, my routines. Her gaze lingered too long, just enough to make me uncomfortable. I told myself it was curiosity, but a part of me noticed the creeping unease that I couldn't quite name. Over the next few weeks, Isla and I grew closer. We shared sketches, small sculptures, walks in foggy parks, and quiet dinners at dim cafes. There was something intoxicating about her. One night she left a tiny clay figurine on my doorstep, a miniature lantern with a flickering candle. "For your night walks," her note read. My pulse quickened. I was falling, I realized, for someone who both thrilled and unnerved me. But the charm always had an edge. Isla would call at odd hours, text cryptic messages about following the wind or the streets, and vanish from plans without explanation. Once, she disappeared for 2 hours while we were supposed to sketch together. I panicked, imagining accidents, misunderstandings, and worse. When she returned, she laughed lightly as if nothing had happened. "I like the shadows," she said simply. My father noticed the change. "You're acting different," he said one evening, lighting his pipe. "Be careful who you let in, kid. Some people, they like to sink into your life and never leave." His warning echoed in my mind, a caution I was too stubborn or too naive to fully heed. One evening, walking through Montclair's foggy streets, Isla's mood shifted suddenly. Her hand gripped my wrist with a force that startled me. "You can't hide from me, Liam. I'll find where your heart sleeps." There was no malice in her voice, only certainty. I shivered. My pulse raced. I wasn't sure whether to be scared or enchanted. It became a pattern. Tender gestures mingled with intensity that left me anxious. I drew her often, capturing moments of laughter and shadow, and each sketch felt like both a confession and a warning. By the end of spring, Isla's presence had taken over my life. I noticed myself checking my phone constantly, wondering where she was, what she thought, how she perceived me. I tried rationalizing her behavior as passionate or creative, but Tessa, my closest friend, wasn't fooled. "You're in too deep," she said one afternoon while we walked through the old train station I often sketched. "She's not just mysterious. She's controlling. Look at the way she latches onto everything in your life." I hated to admit she might be right, but small incidents started stacking. Doors left open after she visited, notes that seemed almost too prescient, conversations where she reminded me of every choice I'd ever made in the past week. One evening, she appeared at my apartment unannounced, moving my sketchbooks around and placing figurines in precise arrangements on the windowsill. "I like order," she said, smiling. My hands shook, part awe, part fear. I knew then that fascination had crossed the line into obsession. The tension escalated when Isla insisted on accompanying me to an abandoned rooftop to sketch. The fog was thick that night, swallowing familiar landmarks. She moved silently, always just a step behind. I realized how vulnerable I had become, walking through shadows under her influence, constantly on edge. I tried confronting her. "Isla, I need space sometimes. I need my routines. I can't let this consume me." Her eyes flashed with something I hadn't seen before, almost predatory. "Space? You're trying to hide from me. From us," she said. The intensity of her gaze made my stomach knot. That night I lay awake, listening to the fog press against my window, questioning everything I had felt. Her presence had been exhilarating, but it had become dangerous. The line between love and control had blurred beyond recognition. I eventually began to reclaim my life. I set boundaries, limited my contact, and leaned heavily on Tessa's support. Isla continued to reach out at first, cryptic messages and unexpected visits, but I stood firm. Each day I reclaimed a little more of my space, my time, my sense of self. I kept sketching, but now the drawings reflected clarity rather than anxiety. Fog-shrouded streets were beautiful, but no longer a prison. Montclair's nights still whispered, but I could walk them without fear of losing myself. I realized the truth. Love should not consume or terrify. Passion can be intoxicating, but it cannot replace trust, respect, and boundaries. Sometimes, letting go is the most courageous act of love you can give yourself. Love and fascination can be intoxicating, but obsession and control are dangerous. True connection respects boundaries, nurtures trust, and allows freedom. Learning to recognize the difference between passion and possession is essential for protecting your heart and preserving your sense of self. I've always lived by order. Schedules, sketches, alarms, and lists. They were the scaffolding of my life. My studio flat near the Thames was tiny, cluttered with drafting tables, rulers, and a haphazard collection of vintage watches. I restored them like I restored myself. Carefully, deliberately, refusing to let anything slip. Born into a fractured family, I learned early that chaos came in subtle doses. A father who vanished too often, a mother who hovered too much, a younger brother who drifted abroad. I measured the world in gears and glass faces because people were too unpredictable. It was autumn 2010 when my life tilted. I met Amara at a riverside cafe tucked beneath the arches of an old bridge. She was photographing reflections in puddles, her camera shaking slightly in the cold drizzle. I noticed her immediately. Messy hair, dark eyes, a grin that suggested she knew secrets no one should. "Excuse me," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "That light, it's perfect for a shot, don't you think?" I blinked. Yes. Very. Perfect." I wasn't sure if I was speaking to her or to the reflection of my own reflection in the glass. "I'm Amara," she said, tilting her head. "And you?" "Evan," I mumbled. My usual caution tickled in my chest like an alarm. Something about her presence was magnetic yet unsettling. We ended up talking for hours. She was fearless, drifting from subject to subject, noticing small details I never would. Children's shoes splashed with water, pigeons arranging themselves in a line, the curve of a lamppost reflected in a puddle. I shared my love of watches, and she listened with that unusual attentiveness that felt almost dangerous. I realized, somewhere between the cappuccinos and laughter, that I wanted more. More time with her, more of the thrill of someone who didn't follow rules. Her teasing unsettled me. "You think too much," she said as she traced the rim of her cup. "Sometimes you just have to watch." I laughed nervously. "Watch what?" "Life," she said simply, and in her eyes I saw the shadows I'd been hiding from. That night I walked home along the foggy Thames embankment, feeling a strange mixture of exhilaration and unease. Her words lingered, brushing against the tight walls I'd built around myself. I didn't know it yet, but Amara would challenge every boundary I had ever enforced. Over the next weeks, Amara became a frequent presence in my ordered life. She'd drop by unexpectedly, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with a camera bag slung over her shoulder. I liked her energy, her immediacy, the way she saw the world in frames and shadows. But small cracks appeared. My sketches would be slightly moved, emails seemed read before I opened them, and notes I hadn't written disappeared from my drafting table. One evening, after a long day drafting a particularly stubborn blueprint, she appeared in my studio doorway. "You're hiding something," she said casually, stepping past me without waiting for an invitation. "I'm not," I said, my voice tight. "I just needed time to finish the plan." Her eyes swept the room and I felt exposed. "You can't hide from me, Evan. I notice everything." It was flattering, dangerous. My pulse quickened. I wanted to be admired, seen, but my instincts were screaming. Our arguments started small. She would ask questions about where I'd been, who I'd seen, how long I'd spent at the office. I deflected, gave vague answers, hoping to protect the structured life I had fought to create. But she laughed at my hesitations, leaning in close, her voice soft but commanding. "You belong in my frame," she whispered one night, brushing her hand over mine as I fumbled to keep my balance on the slippery embankment. My chest tightened, not with desire, but fear. Her obsession was thrilling and terrifying, friends noticed. I stopped returning calls, missed meetups, and lingered in my studio late, convinced that she would somehow appear, blending fascination with intimidation. The life I had meticulously constructed was beginning to crumble. By December, the intensity had escalated. Amara sent me hand-drawn maps of rooftops, cryptic messages with arrows and circles marking points in the city where she had watched. I laughed nervously, pretending it was charming, but the sensation of being followed gnawed at me. One night, my father called. "Evan, love isn't supposed to make you anxious every day," he said. "Don't let someone take over your life." "I'm fine, Dad," I muttered, gripping the receiver like it would keep me tethered to normalcy. But normalcy was gone. She appeared at my flat at odd hours, sometimes holding photographs of me walking home from work. The playful allure I once felt had become suffocating. I installed locks, cameras, even considered moving, but part of me couldn't let go. We argued often, then reconciled, drawn back together by brief touches, shared coffees, and foggy walks along the Thames. The tension between desire and terror became addictive, a pendulum swinging between thrill and dread. The breaking point came one evening when I returned to find her crouched over my drafting table. The street lamp outside highlighted her profile, dark eyes wide, her camera dangling like a weapon of observation. "You can't hide from me," she whispered. Her tone had shifted from playful to uncomfortably serious. "I'm asking you to leave," I said, trying to steady my voice. "You belong with me, Evan," she insisted, grasping my wrist. My pulse raced, my body tensed. I called the police. Within minutes, she was escorted away, but the violation of my personal space lingered. The ordered world I had maintained for so long was fractured, the shadow of obsession etched into the walls of my flat. Even after she was gone, the smallest triggers, a gust of fog, a stray reflection in glass, made me flinch. The warmth of her hand on mine, once intoxicating, now felt like a warning I would never forget. I spent months rebuilding routines, reclaiming my space. Locks, cameras, and strict boundaries became my shield. I returned to my sketches, my watches, my quiet walks along the embankment at dawn. Slowly, I learned to separate desire from danger, to recognize the difference between intimacy and intrusion. I watched the Thames one chilly evening, lights reflecting in the water, and realized some people never truly leave your life. Their presence can haunt like a scent, familiar and alarming. But I could choose my own path, my own boundaries, my own safety. The moral became clear. Love is not control, obsession is not affection, and no connection is worth surrendering your freedom. I stood there, fog curling around my coat, and let the river carry my fear downstream. The city glimmered, alive and beautiful, and I, finally, was free to watch it on my own terms. True love respects boundaries. Obsession disguises itself as intimacy. Trust your instincts, protect your space, and never sacrifice your safety for someone else's desire. Freedom and self-respect are the truest forms of love you can give yourself. I never thought I'd trade city streets for the constant roar of the Atlantic. Yet here I was, unpacking boxes in a small cottage near Cape Elizabeth Lighthouse, the kind of place tourists snap photos of without noticing the salt in the air stings your eyes. My father's warnings about strangers rang in my ears as I adjusted the curtains, letting in the pale morning sun. After years of living in apartments with thin walls and nosy neighbors, this was freedom. But it was also isolation. I grew up with shadows at the edge of my life. Mom disappeared when I was 7, leaving a gaping hole I never really knew how to fill. Dad did his best, working nights at a shipping company, keeping me fed and alive, but I learned early to watch everyone around me. Trust didn't come easily. Yet I'd spent the last decade buried in marine biology, sketching tide pools, tracking shellfish populations, and cataloging sea stars, avoiding human intimacy like it was a tide pulling me under. Portland was a fresh start. I wanted it to be about the crashing waves, the scent of the sea, and the quiet solace of work. I never expected to meet Julian in a photography group that met at the local library. He was immediately different, not in a flashy way, but in a subtle, magnetic sense that drew you closer without you noticing. At first, it was all small talk. Tide patterns, sketching techniques, the changing light at sunset. I told myself it was harmless intellectual flirtation, nothing more. Our online conversations grew longer, more personal. I found myself looking forward to them, and that scared me. He suggested we meet at a cliffside cafe I'd never noticed, claiming it was a hidden gem. I hesitated but eventually agreed. The day arrived, and the sun glinted off the water, making the ocean look impossibly vast. Julian stood at the edge of the cafe's patio, notebook in hand, camera swinging from his neck. "You look even more curious than I imagined," he said. His voice was calm, confident, inviting. I laughed nervously, aware of how fast my pulse was racing. The hours passed in a blissful blur, talking, sketching, mapping tide patterns together. But I noticed the little things that didn't quite sit right. The way he remembered exactly where I parked my car, how he casually asked about my routines. I brushed it off. He was just charming, I told myself, just curious. But deep down, I remembered my father's words. People aren't always who they seem. For a week, everything seemed normal. Julian and I exchanged messages daily, often filled with sketches, observations about tide pools, and playful banter. But subtle signs began to gnaw at me. A handwritten note on my doorstep, featuring a sketch of my cottage at dusk, made my stomach twist. Another note referenced my favorite tide pools with cryptic poetry about loneliness. At first, I laughed it off. Romantic gestures, right? But then he started showing up uninvited. At my lab, at coastal cliffs I often visited alone. Each time my heart raced, a cocktail of thrill and fear. He didn't look threatening, yet the precision of his appearances suggested something carefully planned. One rainy evening, I found him outside my window, jotting into his notebook, lightning illuminating his face. Fear crawled through my veins, but so did a strange curiosity. I wanted to confront him, to yell, but my words caught in my throat. The sense of being observed, monitored, unsettled me in ways I hadn't felt since childhood. Despite this, I couldn't deny the attraction. He kissed me under the lighthouse's rotating beam, whispering, "You're mine in the light and shadow." My rational mind screamed no, but my heart betrayed me. I told myself it was the ocean air, the thrill of summer. Yet each passing day made me increasingly aware that something wasn't right. Julian's questions about my colleagues, his insistence on accompanying me, the obsessive tone in his messages, it all pointed to a control I hadn't anticipated. I started checking the history of the lighthouse area, hoping it would calm me. Instead, I stumbled on old newspaper clippings about a former girlfriend of Julian's who had vanished mysteriously. My stomach turned. The parallels were too specific: the secluded cliffs' poetic obsession and his near-constant presence. My first real shiver of dread ran down my spine. I confronted Julian gently, trying to mask my concern with casual conversation. "I read some old papers and about your previous relationship," I said. His face tightened, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something dark before it vanished behind that calm, hypnotic smile. "You don't have to worry about the past, Clara, that's over," he said smoothly, his hand brushing mine. But I couldn't shake the unease. The line between curiosity and danger had blurred. I realized that love could be intoxicating, but obsession can masquerade as devotion. That night I barely slept. Every crash of waves against the cliff sounded louder, every shadow in my cottage more sinister. I told myself I had to act carefully, to navigate my safety without alerting him. My city-bred caution returned with full force. The tension came to a head one stormy night. I confronted Julian outside the lighthouse, rain pelting both of us. "Why are you following me?" I demanded, voice shaking but resolute. He laughed softly, almost like a private joke. "I'm fascinated by you," he said, drenched, eyes gleaming with a strange intensity. "You move through the world like it's a secret, Clara. I just want to be part of it." "I'm not a project," I snapped. "I'm not a story for you to write, and I'm definitely not someone you can control." For a long moment, he said nothing, studying me like I was some intricate pattern he had finally deciphered. Then he nodded slowly, almost regretfully. I didn't know if he would ever stop, but I knew I couldn't stay and find out. By the end of summer, I packed my research and left the cottage. The sketches of Julian's notes were folded carefully in my journal, a reminder, not a treasure. The waves remained, the cliffs still loomed, but I had reclaimed my boundaries, my independence, and my sense of self. I realized that love, no matter how intoxicating, must never come at the expense of personal safety. Passion can be thrilling, but obsession is dangerous. And sometimes, Walking away is the bravest form of love, love for oneself. Love and curiosity are beautiful, but intuition and self-preservation must never be ignored. Trust is earned, boundaries are sacred, and sometimes the bravest act is to step away from danger disguised as devotion. Obsession is not love. Respect for yourself is. My mother never slept properly. She hoarded letters, books, scraps of paper that smelled faintly of mildew and ink. My father had left long before I could remember, leaving my sister and me to navigate a household that felt half empty, half overstuffed with memories. I barely saw my sister most days. She disappeared into school, friends, or her own world while I buried myself in music. Music became my sanctuary. I started violin at 6. The bow and strings a place where the chaos couldn't reach me. Later, restoring violins became my profession, a delicate, quiet work that gave me a sense of control over something fragile and beautiful. My tiny workshop behind the cobbled alleys near Edinburgh University was a world I could inhabit safely. The streets outside foggy and mysterious, the workshop filled with the scent of varnish and wood shavings. It was my refuge. I was cautious with people. I'd been burned before, emotionally burned by friendships and fleeting romances that demanded more than I could give. I liked connection, yes, but on my terms. That was why, when I met Isabel at a literary reading one autumn evening, I didn't expect the kind of pull she created. She was leaning against the wall, a candle flickering between us. Dark hair streaked with autumn highlights, eyes that seemed to look through me, a soft voice that made the city fade into a hush. She spoke about poetry and old books, about Edinburgh's haunted streets, in a way that felt intimate, even in a room full of strangers. We laughed about thrift store misadventures, shared quiet observations, and I felt something I hadn't in years, my chest tightening, my heart alert, a thrill mingled with warmth. Later, over coffee, we shared our histories. She told me about growing up in a city that never quite felt safe, about the way her curiosity often led her to shadows and alleys most people avoided. I shared my own childhood in a chaotic house, the hours spent repairing violins, and the solace I found in music. She listened as if absorbing every word, nodding just so, eyes locked on mine in a way that made me feel seen. There was no rush, no overt romance yet. Just a connection that felt rare, electric, and slightly dangerous in its intensity. And I, cautious as I was, couldn't help leaning in. Our first official date was a walk through the graveyard behind Greyfriars Kirk, chosen by her. The fog curled around the headstones, the damp stone and fallen leaves giving everything a kind of quiet intimacy. She walked beside me, glancing at the names etched in worn stone, and whispered lines of poetry I hadn't heard before. My pulse raced. I felt both exhilarated and nervous. But even then I noticed tension under the surface. She asked detailed questions about my workshop, subtly probing when I was alone, when I worked, who else entered the space. I laughed it off at first. Curiosity, I told myself. You have such careful hands, she said one afternoon as I repaired a violin. I like knowing where the music lives. She smiled, but the weight behind her words lingered. I swallowed, unsure whether to be flattered or unsettled. My sister called one evening, her voice trembling. Ethan, be careful, you're distracted. Don't let anyone take advantage of your kindness. I brushed it off. I loved Isabel's intensity, her charm, the way she could turn foggy streets into magic. I didn't want to hear warnings, yet small signs began to emerge. Unexpected appearances at my workshop, handwritten notes tucked into violin cases, cryptic poems left on my doorstep. I hear your music in the dark. It calls me to you. The words thrilled and unnerved me simultaneously. Romance and fear intertwined in ways I hadn't anticipated. She could make me laugh, hold my hand so gently that my chest felt full, and then vanish or reappear unpredictably. Once, after a disagreement about me visiting my sister, she disappeared for hours. Returning, I found all the violin's strings twisted and broken. A subtle, terrifying warning. Yet, the connection drew me back. I couldn't reconcile desire with fear. Walking foggy streets at night, sharing poems beneath flickering streetlights, the brush of her hand against mine. These were moments that felt stolen from another world. And I loved them. I hated that I loved them. Friends warned me. Ethan, intensity isn't always passion. Sometimes it's control, one said. And I felt the truth of it gnaw at me, even as I rationalized her behavior as love. By late October, the balance had shifted. The line between admiration and obsession blurred. I received a circle of black roses at my doorstep, a note reading, "Your heart belongs to me in shadow and light." For a moment, I froze. Every moment of joy I'd felt with her collided with terror. I realized that passion and fear could intertwine so tightly that leaving felt impossible, and staying might destroy me. I became hypervigilant, inspecting my workshop, locking doors, checking windows, taking small walks with extra caution. Every note of my violin carried an echo of her intensity, and yet music remained my only escape. I began to reclaim my life slowly. I set boundaries, refused to respond to unscheduled visits, and leaned on my sister and close friends for support. She continued sending notes at first, but eventually the messages stopped. The foggy streets of Edinburgh remained, but I could walk them without trembling at every shadow. I returned to the violin with a renewed sense of purpose. Music became my sanctuary again, not a place to escape, but a tool to rebuild. I understood now that love could thrill and terrify, and that some people's passion could be dangerous if unchecked. I walked along the harbor one evening, bow in hand, playing beneath the lighthouse. The music mingled with fog and distant sea sounds. I felt my chest expand, my heart steady for the first time in months. Love should not come with fear. Desire should not hurt. Intensity and passion can be intoxicating, but true love respects boundaries, nurtures trust, and never seeks control. Obsession can masquerade as devotion, leaving fear and uncertainty in its wake. Recognizing the difference between admiration and possession is essential to protect the heart, preserve safety, and reclaim one's life.